with the time change, some people aren't able to make it or they already had appointments, and I'm sure other people are a little confused. So might be a small showing today. But since you're here, let's get started. At the beginning of each of these, at least for the next few weeks, I'm sharing a few thoughts about the 7 systems of influence. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Genius Zone. And this is being recorded so other people can watch it later, but feel free to ask questions if they come up and we'll stop and address them. So let me share my screen here a bit. Okay, so these are some slides that I've used in the past to talk about the Genius Zone. So your Genius Zone is the combination of skills, experience, knowledge, attributes. Hi, Judith.
Hi.
I'm just starting to talk about Genius Zone, so you're just in time.
Thrilled. I want to just say I appreciate the time change. The day and time, I think it's great. So, all right, I'm listening.
All right. So the idea behind the Genius Zone is that we can do a lot more if we focus on our strengths rather than our weaknesses. Although sometimes our weaknesses can actually become part of our Genius Zone and help us to connect with our audience. And to find our Genius Zone and the power that comes from our Genius Zone, we start out by looking at our expert zones. Our expert zones are all the skills, knowledge, characteristics, talents, anything and everything about us. And so the way that we get started finding our expert zones is that we make a big list of everything that we know anything about that we could even remotely call ourselves some sort of expert on. And often when I talk to people about expert zones, they'll say, well, I mean, I know a little bit about this thing over here, but I'm not an expert at it. And so the analogy I like to draw to explain what I mean by expert zones is this photo of a bear chasing Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world. Now, Usain Bolt, he can run about 17 miles an hour for maybe 100 yards. And a bear can run 35 miles an hour for a lot longer. So imagine you're out in the forest and you come across a bear, you and your friend are out there camping or taking photography or whatever, and a bear comes along. How fast do you have to run to get away from the bear and live? And the answer is faster than your friend. So when it comes to being an expert, I don't mean that you have to be the fastest man in the world or you have to be the best at something. What I mean is you need to know a little bit more about it than maybe most people out there. And sometimes that's relative. For example, I lived in China for a couple of years, and compared to maybe my parents, who have never been to China, don't speak any Chinese, and don't know a lot about Chinese culture, I'm an expert on China. I'm an expert on the Chinese language. And yet compared to a lot of the people that I met in China who had lived there all of their lives or for decades and were fluent in Chinese and had studied the culture and gone to university over there, I felt like I wasn't any expert at all. So it really just depends who we're talking to as to whether we're an expert or not. Now, when it comes to this exercise of finding our Genius Zones, I say, if you can be an expert to anybody, write it down and list it as one of your expert zones. And so if I were making a list of some of my expert zones, I might say, okay, well, I've got the Chinese stuff. I studied Chinese for 6 months. I had a tutor. I lived there. I speak a little bit of Chinese. I'm not fluent, but I know a little bit. I'm going to list that as one of my expert zones because I know more about Chinese and China than most people, perhaps, in the world. And I lived in Utah for 14 years, so I guess I'm kind of an expert on Utah, and I've been a skateboarder my whole life. I know a lot about that. I've been a CEO, at least a CEO of a small company for 25 years. So I know something about that. And I'm kind of a political junkie, so I'd put that on my list. And I know a lot about marketing because I've run a marketing firm for 25 years. So these are some of my expert zones. And if I were really listing all these out to do this exercise completely, I would probably list out 50 or 60 different things that I could say, yeah, I have some expertise in that. And then what we start doing is we start overlapping these expert zones. I'm just showing 2 here for the sake of this diagram, but you might overlap 4 or 5 or 10 of your expert zones. And where a lot of these expert zones overlap, then you have a potential genius zone. So going back to my example, I know a lot about skateboarding. I've been skating since I was 10 years old. I used to run a skate shop when I was a kid. I've worked with people in the industry. So I'm an expert on skateboarding, but my level of expertise doesn't make me special by itself. There are a lot of other people out there who know just as much about skateboarding as I do. And when it comes to marketing, yeah, I'm an expert at marketing. I've had a marketing agency. I studied marketing. I read marketing books. I've been doing marketing forever. So I'm an expert at that. But by itself, that doesn't make me special because there are a lot of other people out there who know a lot about marketing as well. But if I overlap skateboarding with marketing and I say, how many people know as much about skateboarding and as much about marketing as I do? Now that puts me in a special place because there might be a dozen people in the entire world who have that combination of experience that I have. And so I could turn that into a genius zone and take that to Nike or Adidas or somebody who wants to sell a bunch of stuff to skateboarders or teenagers and say, hey, I know marketing and I know skateboarding, and I can help you move a lot of product because of that combination, because of that genius zone. I haven't chosen to make this my genius zone in life. I want to focus on other things. I'm pursuing a different genius zone. But the point is, we all have various genius zones, and there's some genius zone that we can point to and say, that's my calling. That's the thing I want to focus on. That's what I want to do. And maybe that can change from time to time. But when it comes to being authors, we want to align our genius zone with the book material that we're creating. We want to be able to say, I am the person to write this book because of my genius zone, because of that particular overlap of skills and knowledge and experience that I have that maybe nobody else in the world has, or maybe just a handful of people have. And maybe part of that genius zone is it's all the experience, and maybe a bunch of other people have that experience or knowledge or skills, but maybe it's your voice. Maybe it's the tone that you bring to it that makes it unique and different from what everybody else has. So that's the idea behind the genius zone. And when we find that genius zone, it's really like a superpower because it gives us motivation. We can draw on it and point to it when we need to look at how to focus our book on our audience. We can say, well, what do I really know? Where can I really dive deep and share something that other people might not be able to? And we can make our book unique that way by focusing on that genius zone. So Marie, Judith, any questions about that?
Yes. I have a question about, well, I liked what you did with the skateboarding and the marketing and then creating that overlap, but I'm having a hard time figuring out where that overlap would be for me. So my book is focused on, essentially, if I had to distill it down probably into a couple of words, how to excel without burnout, or, how to thrive at work and in life, given all the pressures, etc. And I've been doing this for a long time, teaching it, coaching it, training. So, but that's just the one bubble. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the other bubble is that would create that. So how would I find that? Like, I'm a cyclist, but that doesn't matter. So,
Well, it's easy to say it doesn't matter, but it might be relevant. And so if I were working with you and developing this genius zone, I'd say write it all down, put the cycling down, put everything down. But let's go
right.
through this real quick. So
I wrote down coaching, I wrote down training, and there's unique aspects like emotional intelligence is the framework I use. It's good for communication, it's good for leadership, it's good for collaboration, creating a collaborative culture. I've been teaching for more than a decade. So I don't, yeah.
okay. So you said your book it's partly about burnout. It's about emotional intelligence. What else would you say your book is about?
Not burning out.
Well, not burning out, yes.
Most people are like, I mean, pretty much everybody at some point has said, I'm so burned out, right? Or I'm so exhausted, or I don't know how much longer I can do this. So managing your energy, that's the other area. So I have a background in science and physiology. And so using what I know about how the body works with how our thinking, maybe that's the overlap. So we have a system, our human operating system, and we can't just power through. It's understanding how to manage our energy, manage our system, our entire system, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and what's happening with us physically. And when we get all of that, in fact, I would do 3 circles and put the center you. I just thought of that. I'm sure it's not new, but I'm going to do that right now. Mental, physical, there's the motivational.
I mean, this is very much just quick napkin writing down stuff type of work here, but some of the things you already told me. So, I mean, you've done coaching, and that helps when you're writing a book because it helps you know how to talk to people and how to communicate ideas to people. And we're talking about motivation. And of course, coaching, a lot of coaching is about motivating people. And you've researched topics like motivation, psychology, energy, thinking, physiology, burnout, emotional intelligence. Like these are all expert zones for you. You know a lot about each of those areas, right? Now, if you were saying, I'm going to write a book just about emotional intelligence, you might say, well, I'm not the expert on emotional intelligence. That's not my genius zone. I'm an expert at that, but I'm not a genius at that. You could probably name somebody else and say, oh, so-and-so is the genius on emotional intelligence. And there's probably somebody else who's the expert on burnout. And there's probably somebody else who's the expert on motivation and energy. Each of those things, there's somebody else who's probably the genius. That is their genius zone. That one thing is their genius zone. But you're bringing all these things together and you're overlapping all these things. And so when you overlap them and you say, who knows more about emotional intelligence and burnout and thinking and how to manage systems and physiology and motivation? When you start overlapping all those things and you say, and who knows all those things and has the motivation to actually write a book about it and do the research, and who knows how to do the research because they have an academic background, that's where we get down to a very small group of people, and maybe you're the only one. Does that make sense?
Yes. So it's not just finding 2 things. It's like I can make a bunch of bubbles and find where all those bubbles overlap, is what you're saying.
Exactly. We don't want to get distracted by any one bubble and say, oh, I'm not the genius at this, or I'm not the best at this. It's the overlap. Are we the best at the overlap, or are we a part of a very small group when we create that overlap?
Yes. Yeah. I got it. Okay, cool. Thank you. That was very helpful. Appreciate it.
And that really gives us the confidence, right? Because then you feel like, I mean, it's hard to write a book when you feel like, there are 1,000 other people out there who could write this better than I could. Or there's one person out there who could write this so much better than I could write it. Why am I even bothering? It makes it hard to see that book through. But when we look at it and we say, you know what? I know all these different things and I'm bringing these all together. And I don't know if there's anybody else out there who could bring all of this together. Or maybe there are 10 people out there, but I can do it as well as any of they can, and maybe better. And then we feel like, okay, I've got to do this, because if I don't do this, nobody else is going to do it. And that can help us stay motivated.
That actually is like the fact that that is what's motivating me, because there's a million books out there that probably say a large percentage of what I'm going to say, but there's a unique integration of these different aspects of ourselves that I don't hear. I hear people talk about mindset, and I hear people talk about motivation, and I hear people talk about physical health and taking care of yourself. But I don't hear people talking about how each of those items influences the other, and it does matter.
Exactly.
So,
and that's
okay.
exactly the concept of the Genius Zone.
Cool. I'm a genius.
Awesome. Right. We're all geniuses at something. In fact, we're all geniuses at a lot of things. We all have a lot of potential genius zones. But once we find all those different genius zones, it just comes down to, where is my calling? What do I feel drawn to do? So, and Marie, let's see, not thinking about that now, just thinking about how to get that unique story out and tell it a way that is real and memorable. Great. And Marie, feel free to ask any questions again, or any other comments you want. Stick them in the chat there if you prefer. And but now we're just going to go into the open Q&A. So Judith, let's follow up. How are things coming along with your book?
Well, I've had a bit of an unplanned hiatus. So I feel very, well, I'm looking, there are two ways to look at it. It feels kind of distant, but on the other hand, I feel like sometimes when you step away, you come back with something with fresh eyes. So I'm feeling pretty excited and motivated about it. So I've had family visiting. Luckily, they're off doing their own thing this morning, and I was really excited to say, hey, I've got a meeting. You guys go have fun. So that I could connect with just the book again, and where I want to go with it. So I'm excited about opening it up again after not opening it up. I don't know if it's been a week or two. Time has just gotten really weird. But looking forward to opening it up in this session here.
Cool.
And reading it.
Marie, can you tell us what you're working on, or what your book idea is? You said you're thinking about how to get that unique story out. What is the unique story that you're trying to share? And actually, while you're typing that up, Marie, I'll share one of my book experiences I've had recently. I've been ghostwriting a book for an entrepreneur, a business owner. And I've been the book that we're trying to write together is his system for his success. We've been trying to distill what makes him successful, and how do we turn that into a formula or a system or a series of steps that other people can follow to achieve similar success. And it's been a little bit tough to do, because he doesn't know what his system is or what his formula is. He just does what he does. And so I've had to go shadow him and watch him at his business and talk to other people at his business and try to figure out, what is it that, his name is Blake, what is it that Blake does that makes him special and makes his business special, that's different from what other people are doing? And it's also hard for the people who work with him, because they just say, well, I don't know, he just does stuff and he's a great leader. And they give me all these kind of generic statements, but I'm like, that's not enough. There's something specific he's doing that's different from what other people do. And so over the past 2 years, we've actually been working on this book together. I've been trying to distill this down, and I've made a lot of progress over the past 2 years, but it's still been a little bit tough to fill in all the gaps. And so it's been tough to write his book, because I start writing and I'm like, oh, there's something missing here. But at the same time, he's been mentoring me with my business, with my marketing agency, and giving me advice. And that's been really helpful. So I had the idea the other day to try to write out his formula, but as part of a fictional narrative about somebody who's an entrepreneur, but struggling, and then finds this person who can mentor them. And in the book, essentially, I'm the person who is struggling and Blake is the person mentoring. And I thought, I'm just going to write this out as a story about these two people meeting and then one of them getting advice from the other and how it changes the business. And once I started thinking about the story that way and writing it out, it just started flowing out. And in the past 2 days, I've written about 9,000 words in this book. And a normal book is 50, 60,000 words, a business book. And so that process has really made it easy for me to think through what I've learned from Blake and try to just put it in a different format than I was trying before. And now it's coming out very easily. I don't know if that will become the book, or maybe it will become a companion book to the other book, or maybe this is just an exercise that will help me to write the book that we started writing. But looking at it from that different frame of reference has helped me to certainly get more of the ideas out and figure out what that formula is by putting it into what they call narrative nonfiction, or writing a story. There's an author, Patrick Lencioni, who does this. He's written 20 books that are this type of format. They're all stories, but they're all business books, and they all teach some sort of lesson. In fact, let's see, I've got one.
How does he spell his last name?
Lencioni. It's
Lencioni.
Lencioni. So here's one of Patrick Lencioni's books, The Ideal Team Player. And so if you read this book, it's a story, and it's got fictional characters, but it's trying to teach business principles through a fictional story. And I think he has 20 of these or something. He's very popular. But that's essentially the type of book I'm writing right now. And I found that it's so much easier for me to write than the other type of book that's more of a 7 habits type of book or something.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've read books like that where it's metaphorical, but it gives you the lessons that you need.
Mm-hmm.
So, writing it the way I think, is this similar? Like when I'm writing my book, and then I liked Marie's comments. I don't want to hog this, but just to say this, that I think about someone I've taught or coached when I'm writing, keeping in mind this kind of person that I'm writing to.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think sometimes when we write a story like this, it's easier to focus on a person because we get caught up in the story and it starts to develop in our heads, and then it becomes easier to write it out as a story. Yeah. So if you ever get stuck on your book, this is something you might try. If you get stuck writing, you might try something like this and say, you know what, I'm going to try to write a little bit of fiction here and see how that goes.
I already know someone who needs Marie's book.
Well, let's see. So Marie says, working on how to help people move through suffering and see beauty and goodness shine through using my own life as a September 11th family member. Have never written down what I know. Lifts you to keep trusting. And you've read a lot of Lencioni books. Great. Wow. So as a September 11th family member, that must be rough. Even, the whole 9/11 thing, I was in Utah when it happened, and I was in my 20s, I think. Yeah, I was in my 20s in Utah. I was a college student, just starting my business. And I had no connections really to the East Coast. And yet still, like, they've made a few movies about September 11th and such, and I can't watch them. I can't go watch them. It's just, and I'll tell my kids, I'm like, I just can't. It was such we all felt it across the country. And it's still like raw, even though I wasn't directly involved. And so I can only imagine being directly involved, what it must be like. But so, and I think, talking about the Genius Zone, Marie, your direct experience, whatever it was, we don't know exactly what it was, but if you're a September 11th family member, that makes you part of a very unique group, right? And if we think about that as part of your Genius Zone, that's something that is so special and so unique that it gives you power to be able to help other people. Because it's something simple where you can say, I'm part of this group. This is part of who I am. And instantly everybody knows something, they can connect to that. Even though they didn't experience it directly, they know about September 11th. And so instantly they can say, oh, this is somebody I'm going to listen to. And it gives you credibility in a way because it's just something that everybody knows. My wife and I were actually talking about this yesterday, that she's reading the biography of Andre Agassi called Open. And Andre Agassi, of course, was #1 tennis player for a while and had this amazing career. And then it turned out in the end that he actually hated tennis and he only played it because his father forced him to. And yet he became the #1 ranked tennis player. And he really had a painful, ugly life. My wife's been reading the book and sharing all this with me about his story. And as we read it, I think, is his life really that much more interesting than anybody else's life? If you stripped away his #1 ranking as a tennis player, if you took away his marriage to Brooke Shields, if you took away all the trappings of celebrity and fame, he's just a guy who had a hard life. And yeah, he had trouble with his dad and stuff. Well, so many people could write that book, right? So many people could write a book that would be just as painful. They had just as hard of a childhood. They had just as hard of a life. And maybe they overcame it and were successful, but in ways that the world doesn't recognize. And so it's not that anybody else can't write the same book or doesn't have the same story, but there's something about the fact that we all know who he is that makes the book interesting. There's something that connects us. If I read the book and somebody else reads the book and we connect and we say, oh, have you read Open by Andre Agassi? Oh yeah, I've read that. It's the fact that he's a celebrity and famous that allows us to connect, and somehow it's more exciting than if it's just a random person, right? And so there's power in just being known by a lot of people. There's power in celebrity for celebrity's sake, in a sense. And when we have that kind of power, then I believe we have an obligation to use it to make the world a better place. And so this is a roundabout way of saying, if you're a part of a September 11th family member, then you have some of that power because you're part of something that a lot of people, virtually everybody in the world, recognizes and knows of. And if they can't identify with it, they know what it is. And that gives you power. And that's a power that you can leverage to help other people, to serve other people, which is what it sounds like you're trying to do. And I've been to conferences where they would bring in motivational speakers. I was at one years ago, and it was a guy who, when he was 7 or 8 years old, he was playing with friends in a train yard, and he fell down on a track and got run over by a train, and it cut his legs off pretty close to his hips. And you think, well, now he goes around the world and he's a motivational speaker and he gets paid $10,000 or $15,000 every time he speaks. And you kind of think, well, just because you got your legs cut off, you deserve to get paid $15,000 every time you go speak to a group? Like, what's with that? Well, it's not that. It's that after that happened, instead of laying around and moping and feeling sorry for himself, he went out and he did a bunch of amazing things that would be pretty tough when you don't have legs, like hiking Mount Kilimanjaro without legs. How do you do that? Well, he did that. And he did a bunch of other things And so when you hear him speak, you realize, hey, this guy has been through something really hard, but he overcame it. And if he overcame the hard things he overcame, then maybe I can overcome the hard things that I face in my life too. And so there's that aspect of suffering that when you've been through that experience, and especially something like this where people recognize the experience, people can instantly connect with you and feel like you understand them and feel like what you have to share is going to help them. And that's the power. If I went and spoke to the same audience that you might speak to, Marie, or if I tried to write the same book that you write, I wouldn't have the instant connection with people. I would have to work really hard to convince them that I understand or that I have any sense of what they might be going through. Whereas you can say, I'm a September 11th family member, and instantly people will open up and be vulnerable and accept what you're saying because of that experience. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit here, but what I'm trying to say is you're in a position of unique power, and it's part of your genius zone, and it puts you in a place where you can help a lot of people much more efficiently than somebody like I would be able to, because I haven't had that kind of experience. Sorry, that was kind of long-winded, but.
I think you make a really good point that actually we relate, and we especially relate to people ordinary people who overcome hurdles, and the people we admire aren't people who, quote unquote, had a silver spoon in their mouths, even though their lives are probably harder than we think. But people who have overcome obstacles and hurdles and who are able to express, and I know that I appreciate so much whenever somebody who has overcome something shares it, because I always learn from that. And then I realize, you know what, I'm not sharing how I overcame things, and who might that help? But I always do appreciate it. And Marie, I think it's great that you are planning to write this book. It's wonderful. It definitely, and especially the idea that we can experience joy and inner peace and beauty even through suffering. And I've met a few people like that, and it's incredibly inspiring and helpful. The human experience is just tough. We need people like you.
Yeah. And Marie, any questions you have, we'd love to be able to help you on your book journey here, whether you're trying to get started or if you've already gotten started, but you're stuck at a certain place or something. Just let us know what questions you have, what we can do to help. And I don't know what your story is. I would love to know what it is. I would love to read your story in memoir form and hear what you have to say. But yeah, let us know how we can help. Let us know what questions you have. So, how do I keep in touch? So, we have various groups where you can interact with other members of the group, or you can ask me questions 24/7. So we have a Facebook group, a WhatsApp group, a Twitter group. Most people are in the Facebook group. It's not super active. I think a lot of people are avoiding Facebook these days so they don't get sucked into it. But you can go on the Facebook group and ask questions 24/7. We have this weekly coaching every Friday, the same time. We have this, excluding holidays. And also, anytime you want to email me, you can email me directly. My email is josh@publishedauthor.com. And you can always send me an email and ask questions there as well, and I'm happy to answer. But we've got all these resources for you and would love to help any way we can to help you get your story out there. All right. So, Judith, do you have any other questions or anything else you want to talk about today?
No, I'm gonna use the next hour, as you do, to revisit what I've begun and see where I need to go next and continue. And I also have to make a phone call, so I'll go on mute and turn off my camera and do that, and then get to work on the book for an hour.
All right. And just so you know, Marie, what we do is we have this Q&A discussion here at the beginning, but then I always block out another hour after this call where we can just work together. For anybody who wants to stick around, we just all go on mute. I'll stay on the camera, but I'll be working on one of my book projects, and Judith will be working on her book, and anybody else who's on these calls, they just go on mute and we work on the book together. And it's just a way to be accountable to each other and help people get some work done on their books, whether it's writing or cover design or marketing or anything else. So if you would like to hang out and work on your book with us, you're more than welcome to. If you need to drop off, that's fine too, but we'll go on mute and we'll start working on our book projects, and we'll work for the next hour or so on that. If you have any questions while we're on that, you can plug it in the chat or just unmute and talk, and we can chat more. All right.
Okay, so I'm going to go off camera for a bit, but I'll be back in a few minutes.
All right, sounds good.
And I'll figure it out. And then I heard these beeping noises and I opened it up and everything was back to where it was. Even this connection was still, I was like, okay, this is interesting. Anyway, you can ignore my.
Okay.
And back to work.
Okay, sounds good. Hello, Nicole. You caught us in the middle of our accountability working session, but welcome to the call today.
Hi. Yeah, it's the last day of the quarter, and so I had an unexpectedly very long talk with my boss about some work I need to do. But I'm so excited that you're doing this on Fridays, and I'm going to start joining you.
Awesome, great. I'm glad this time will work out for you.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to drop for now, get back to work, but I will see you next week.
All right, sounds great.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was short and sweet.
But I think you're going to get a good response to your new time and day.
I hope so. Part of the reason I'm doing it is I was reading I have a friend, Benjamin Hardy. He's written a bunch of books over the past few years. And one of them is called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And I was reading it and he talked about how he organizes his week so that all his calls are on Fridays. And he's a writer. So he says, I like to do all my creative work as early in the week as possible when my brain is fresh and my thoughts are going. And then he does his calls on Friday because his brain's a little bit dead by Friday, but he can talk to people, but it's harder for him to write by Friday. And I thought, well, most of the stuff I'm doing is creative work too. I'm doing a lot of writing and such, but I had all my calls bulked up on Tuesdays. And I thought I really should be using Monday, Tuesday, and probably into Wednesday as like my prime creative time. But here I am filling it with calls, which I can do anytime. And so that was part of the motivation, was thinking, well, I should push these to Friday because Fridays come around and Fridays are kind of dead. Nobody's around on Fridays. It's like everybody's already checked out. So I have very easy free time on Fridays, but then I'm burned out and I sit around and I try to write and I can't. And I thought I should really move these calls, all my calls, to Friday so that when I'm burned out on writing, I can still do these calls. And so that was part of it. The other part of it was just trying to try something else different and thinking, well, most people have kind of slower Fridays. Maybe it'd be easier for people to attend this on a Friday, and let's just try out something different. So that was part of it as well.
I think it's great for all the reasons you said. I think for everybody getting into work, starting the work week, there's a lot going on the first 3 days of the week for sure. Sometimes, the last couple, but Fridays are a great day. Most people I know have more flexibility on a Friday, even if they're in a 9-to-5 job. So, yeah.
I hope
So
it works
that's
out going forward.
I do too. It looks like I'm going to have a call at 12:30, so you'll probably see me drop off at the half hour.
Okay.
You're in.
Well, we
Pacific.
can just drop it right now. It's just you and me. So do you want to just drop
Okay.
off and we'll end it right now?
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week. Have a happy 4th.
You too. Thanks, Judith.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.